Hope you're having a good week, and hopefully, if you're not, or even if you are, we can make it a bit better by helping you earn some extra cash this weekend, and it's definitely needed at this time of year. Christmas, obviously very expensive, and for many people very stressful, especially if you've got kids and a big family. So in these tough times, it can be more stressful than ever before. So I've put tens of hours into researching this week's card, and I've got 15 years experience betting this sport, over 10 years of profitable results betting this sport. As you can see, over the last 10 years, made a profit almost every month live betting on the UFC. And so hopefully you'll find the information that I share with you in this video useful. We'll be taking a deep dive into each of the main card fights. And like I say, it's a very tough time of year. And as you can see from this profit chart, we make a profit almost every single month of the year. So in these tough times, I want to help some of you out. So if you'd like to try out my live betting group for free, send an email. I'll leave my email address down below, or just come to my website and you can hit this chat with Allsop button down the bottom. I'll leave a link to my website below. We'll get you set up with a free trial, and you know, I'm pretty confident by the end of that free trial you would have earned more money than what you started with, because as you can see, we make a profit in about 73% a month. So you'd be pretty damn unlucky if you had a free trial with me and you didn't make a little bit of cash. So obviously there's only 2 UFC events before Christmas, so not a whole lot of time for you to earn, you know, a real meaningful amount of cash in time for the big day, the expensive day. But January, February are real tough months for people. So fingers crossed, with a busy UFC schedule in February and March, if you jump on this free trial, hopefully we can make the start of your 2026 a little bit less painful, a little bit less of a struggle financially. And if you join the live betting group, I'm extremely confident you'll absolutely love it, because I'm the best in the world at this. And like I say, you will make a profit almost every month. And when we do have losses, as you can see, relative to the profits, the losing streaks are very, very small. They're more break-even stretches than losing streaks, to be honest with you. I think our maximum drawdown is only 14 units, which happened here. And as you can see in the big picture, barely even a scratch. So jump on the free trial, give it a try. I'm sure you will absolutely love it, especially because a lot has changed in my live betting group recently, where we now have a brand new live betting system. So if you've been in my live betting group before, you didn't like the fact that there were spoilers, you could kind of be forced to listen to my commentary to get the bets. You don't even need to worry about that anymore. We've got an audio notification system where you can be watching the fights, and if any bets pop up, you can get an audio notification with just 10 milliseconds of latency, so you're not delayed or anything like that. So you don't even have to listen to my commentary anymore to take advantage of live betting. You can just listen to the audio notification and enjoy the fights. Speaking of enjoying the fights, hopefully you enjoy these breakdowns. And we're going to kick things off by breaking down the fight between Dvalishvili versus Peter Yan. I also just want to say before we jump into this one, there is a cap on the number of people I can have in the live betting group at any one time, just because the more people that bet the same thing at the same time, the faster the odds move and decline. So I'll do the free trials on a first come first serve basis, and once they're gone, just because I can't have like hundreds of people or even 50 people doing it. Gotta keep the group very small. So what I will do, if you do email me, and I've run out of trials by the time you do email me, when the current free trials expire, I'll put you top of the list and let you know, give you one then basically. Everyone that emails will get one, just maybe not will get one straight away, if that makes sense. Alright, so we're diving into the main event now. This is Dvalishvili versus Peter Yan. It's a rematch of a fight that was pretty one-sided, a hell of a lot more one-sided than I thought it was going to be going into that fight. But here we are. Now we've got a rematch, and Dvalishvili is a big favourite at average odds of about 1.23, which is going to be minus 433 for an implied probability of 81%. Compare that to Peter Yan, who's a 4.26 underdog, which is going to be plus 326 for an implied probability of 24%. So Dvalishvili's been looking great over the last few years. He's the champ. He dominated Yan in the first fight. Can we expect anything to change at all in this rematch? Well, we'll get into potentially some things that could have changed. But if if you don't want to spend the next 10-15 minutes listen to me bang on about this fight, I do think Dvalishvili will, win this relatively easily, probably even more easily than he did the first fight. But we'll get into the reasons why I hold that opinion. So we can use the fighter comparison tool. You also get this if you join my website. Just go to tools. You can see the UFC research tool here. Click that. You gain access to this. Very, very useful. Gives you loads of information in one place. You don't have to go running all over the internet for useful information. You can get it from the research tool, MMABettingTips.com. Link in the description below. So both guys are about the same age. They're about the same size. They have about the same reach. They have exactly the same leg reach. We see a lot of stance switching from Mr. Yan. Now, in terms of the actual performance stats, things get really interesting because you could clearly see that Yan has the advantage when it comes to striking stats, but then Merab has the advantage clearly when it comes to grappling stats. Although I do want to talk a little bit about how things may have changed in this rematch when we get into how they match up stylistically. So you can see Yan lands about 20% more strikes per minute. He's more accurate, slightly better defensively, but obviously Dvalishvili probably holds a bunch of crazy records for most takedowns attempted ever. I would imagine he shoots an absurdly high percentage of high number of takedowns per fight, and you can see that very, very high. On average, 6 takedowns per 15 minutes, 2 per round, which is very, very high. Takedown offense about the same. Notably, you can see that P.E. Yan has around 85% takedown defense. He's very difficult to take down, very difficult to hold down. We'll be talking about how that impacts this matchup as we go through the breakdown. In terms of strike distribution chart, you can see virtually identical. Both guys very top heavy. They tend to go for the head and not a whole lot else, to be honest with you. 80% strikes for both guys landing to the head. So how do these two match up stylistically? Well, let's first of all talk about grappling, because we've seen a lot of grappling in their first fight, and we want to discuss if anything's changed and if Yan could potentially do anything differently to change the course of this matchup. So I say this every time Dvalishvili fights, but Dvalishvili's an amazing guy. He's an amazing fighter, but he does have a huge flaw in his style of fighting, in that he doesn't have really any physicality to his MMA grappling. So whilst he's very good from a technical point of view, Dvalishvili's gas tank comes at a cost. So we talk about this in every Dvalishvili fight, right? If you think about a Pokemon, right? A Pokemon can't be great at everything. It has strengths and it has weaknesses, right? You have fire Pokemon, very effective against earth Pokemon, but very vulnerable to water Pokemon, right? Every Pokemon has a strength and weakness. A lot of the time, MMA fighters are the same. Every once in a while, you'll get a unicorn like a John Jones or a George St. Pierre. Doesn't have any real weaknesses at all, but they're very fucking rare. Most fighters in the UFC, if they have a big strength, there will be a big weakness to offset that. And generally speaking, for every specific strength, there is a specific weakness attached to it. So in the case of Merab Dvalishvili, he has maybe the best cardio we've ever seen in the history of the sport. But the trade-off of that incredible cardio is that he doesn't have much power. He doesn't have much physicality. He's not particularly strong in grappling positions. And you could compare that to other guys that have a crushing physicality to their MMA grappling, but then they lack, they lack the cardio to go with it. So like a Rodolfo Vieira would be a really good example. If he gets on top of you, you're in a lot of trouble, but he tires out very, very quickly because that physicality comes at a cost. So when you look at Dvalishvili's past fights, the stats behind his matchups tell the story of how ineffective his MMA grappling is, in the sense that he doesn't achieve anything with the vast majority of takedowns that he shoots. He has a very inefficient style of fighting. And Dvalishvili is very unique because to any other human probably on earth that has ever fought in the UFC, his style of fighting would be completely impractical. But he has this superhuman gas tank which enables him to do something that in 30 years, 25 years of watching this sport, I've never seen anyone else do. And if you look at the numbers behind his fights, it's absurd. He shot 37 takedowns against Corey Sandhagen, 12 against Sean O'Malley, the fight only lasted 15 minutes, 30 against Umar Nurmagomedov, 12 in the first O'Malley fight, 11 against Cejudo, 49 takedowns in the first Peter Yan fight, 20 takedowns against John Dodson, 18 against Gustavo Lopez, 24 against Casey Kenny. These are takedown statistics you will not see with any other fighter in the UFC. There's no other fighter that even gets close to shooting the volume of takedowns that Dvalishvili shoots. I mean, for context, Dvalishvili shoots more takedowns than some motherfuckers in the UFC land strikes. You know, you look at some of the heavyweights, they're not landing, throwing 49 strikes in a fight. They're not throwing 37 strikes in a fight, right? Absurd numbers. But you can also see that the actual success rate behind the takedowns attempted is really poor. You know, only successfully completed about 50% of the takedowns on Sandhagen, less than 50% in the second O'Malley fight. You know, not even 30% takedown success rate against Nurmagomedov, less than half against O'Malley, less than half against Cejudo. And this stat here is super interesting to me, because I don't know if shooting 49 takedowns in a UFC fight is a record, but I'm guessing it fucking is, because I've never seen a number that high before on takedowns attempted in a fight. So in the first Peter Yan fight, Merab Dvalishvili attempted 49 takedowns. 49 fucking takedowns. That's unbelievable. I mean, that's so far above the average. I mean, it's absurd. It's an absurd number, an absolutely absurd number. But what's an even more absurd number is that he only completed 20% of them, or only successfully completed 20% of them, which is kind of pathetic. It's very bad. And it shows two things, or it tells us two things. First thing it tells us is that Peter Yan has incredible takedown defense, because he's done far better than anyone else at stopping Dvalishvili's wrestling. The second thing it tells us is Peter Yan's got incredible cardio, because to still be able to go to a decision after a guy who's tried to take you down 49 fucking times, pretty damn impressive. The third thing that it tells us is that no matter how well you defend yourself against Dvalishvili's wrestling, he will not stop trying to take you down. What you see with a lot of wrestlers, and we see this every week in the UFC, and it's incredibly frustrating if you bet fighters that do this, what you see a lot of the time is, if a wrestler tries to take their opponent down and their opponent easily neutralizes it, and then they try and take them down again and their opponent easily neutralizes it again, a lot of the time the wrestler will just be like, fuck this, I'm not going to keep wasting energy trying to get a guy down that I don't think I can get down. And they just start to stand and strike, and quite often if they're facing a good striker and they're a grappler, they'll just end up getting outstruck. Not Dvalishvili. This guy doesn't fuck around. He understands the age-old saying in football, soccer, if you're watching for the United States, Australia, one of those countries, but football, Donald Trump today said they need to change the name of football and the NFL to something else, because what the fuck is soccer? Yeah, football. One of the oldest sports in the world. Anyway, I digress. What this stat shows us is Dvalishvili understands an age-old concept in sports, in football. And that quote, that concept, that theory is, if you don't shoot, you don't score. And what that quote means is, the more shots you take, the more chance you've got of scoring. No matter what the quality of those shots are, if you shoot 100, 200 times on goal, it doesn't matter what the quality of those shots are like, you've got a far better chance of scoring than someone that's only shooting 5 or 10 really high quality shots, right? So Dvalishvili's, many of his takedown entries aren't great. Not the most effective MMA grappler in terms of landing takedowns. We can see that through the fact that, struggles to take down his opponents, the majority of the time, 50% at best in a lot of these fights. But he keeps going. And by going and going and going and continually persisting to try and take his opponents down, he forces them to exert energy to defend the takedowns. and then eventually they get worn out and those takedowns start to become easier, or it tires them out, which makes their striking a lot less effective, which is what we saw in the first Petr Yan fight. You can see Dvalishvili landed 147 strikes, which again, very, very, very impressive. That's a high volume of strikes in a 5-round fight. So Petr Yan's takedown offense is elite. The first fight shows us that, where, you know, Dvalishvili only completed 20% of the takedowns, kind of pathetic. Yan, very difficult to take down, very difficult to hold down. But based on the first fight, Dvalishvili will keep it coming. So what can we learn from those stats? How do we interpret what those stats mean for this rematch? Well, from my perspective, I'm optimistic that Yan may cause Dvalishvili some problems this weekend, because it's impossible to train for a guy like Dvalishvili, because there's really no one else like him on earth. The guy's an alien. You know, he is really superhuman. He's really special. No one can push the kind of pace that Dvalishvili pushes. Having said that, Dvalishvili also in their first fight had the element of surprise on his side. So, you know, Yan couldn't have prepared for someone that was going to attempt to take him down 49 times. It's impossible. And so when Dvalishvili has the element of surprise on his side, it can make him a lot more difficult to deal with. Now, Yan has had some experience. He spent 25 minutes in the octagon with Dvalishvili. He knows exactly what to expect in this rematch. And as a result, he could be better prepared. And that could make life much more difficult for Dvalishvili, because to be fair to Yan, for the most part, I mean, stuffing, almost 40 takedowns out of 49, pretty fucking impressive. So, you know, if his gas tank holds up a bit better this time, Dvalishvili could be in a lot of trouble. And that's kind of how I see the grappling. Now, when it comes to striking, things start to get a little bit interesting, because with Dvalishvili, when he first fought Yan, his striking was very low level. He was sloppy, bad defensively, not particularly dangerous on the feet. But Dvalishvili is a guy who I feel has improved his striking hundreds of % since their first fight. Because when they first fought, really he was just a wrestler. Dvalishvili is a guy that has improved his striking exponentially. And so for me, this is what makes this fight so much more difficult for Yan. Because in the first fight, Dvalishvili could overwhelm Yan with takedowns and spam takedowns, and then that could open up opportunities on the feet when he had Yan thinking about the takedown. But Dvalishvili really still didn't have the striking to hurt him, which is why he threw 350 strikes, landed 150 of them, and didn't really hurt Petr Yan in a 25-minute fight. Yes, you know, Yan was worn down and busted up a bit, but it tended to be from volume and output, as opposed to, you know, big shots that could potentially end the fight or bust Yan up real bad and damage him, right? In this fight, it's different, because Dvalishvili is a legitimately dangerous striker now. So if Yan does start to get worn down from the takedowns and tired, Dvalishvili could have a lot of success on the feet. On top of that, you know, once Dvalishvili's got Yan thinking about those takedowns again, he might not even need to, right? Yan probably from the very first second, he's going to be worried about those takedowns. That will open Yan up on the feet and enable Dvalishvili to have a lot more success with his striking than perhaps in the first fight. So, good fight for Dvalishvili. I think another issue with Yan is, you know, we've just said how much Dvalishvili's improved over the years, particularly in the last few years. His striking is miles ahead of where it was. With Yan, he's not really all that different from the guy that came into the UFC. I mean, this is partly because he was so good to begin with, but Yan is one of those guys that hasn't really evolved. He's still pretty much the same guy that made his debut, very good everywhere. But because he hasn't evolved much and he fights the same in every fight, he's kind of easy to game plan for. You know exactly what to expect. I mean, you know exactly what to expect from Dvalishvili as well. But stopping the guy is a completely different problem to solve, which no one has really solved. So, yeah, Dvalishvili, absolute monster. Very difficult fight for Yan. And I do think Dvalishvili will probably win this fight even more dominantly than the first one, to be honest with you, because like I say, he's a much better striker now. Unfortunately, we're not able to do a whole lot in terms of betting this fight, because Dvalishvili is a huge favourite, carrying an implied probability of 81%. You'd have to give him like an 85% chance of winning in order to get any value here. It just doesn't get me excited. I don't see the point personally. So, in terms of the over-under on this one, we take a look at the over-under. Very, very steep odds on the fight to go over 4.5 rounds. 1.27, that's kind of crazy because, I mean, 25 minutes is a long time in the octagon. A very, very long time. And Dvalishvili's striking has improved a lot. I mean, someone could get injured. The implied probability on odds of 1.27 is 80%. Does this fight go to a decision 80% of the time? I don't know, those odds feel a little bit wide to me. Let me know what you think in the comments below or in the chat room. We're not on Discord anymore. We've got our very own chat room. Come check it out. Only launched very recently. So, yeah, man. Those odds feel a bit wide. If I was betting the over-under on this one, I would just let the odds do the work for me and I would take the under. Kind of surprised they're that wide. Obviously, it's most likely to go to a decision, but those odds feel a little bit crazy. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen odds that steep on a fight to go to a decision. There was a 5-rounder. I mean, that's kind of crazy. I mean, they're both very tough, very difficult to finish, but still, odds very steep. 25 minutes, a long time in the octagon. In terms of the prop bets, most likely outcome is going to be Dvalishvili by decision, but judging by the over odds, I can't imagine the odds on that are going to be playable. No, they're absolutely shocking. So that is a very, very easy pass. And now let's move on to another very interesting fight, which is going to be Alexandre Pantoja versus Joshua Van. So we can see the Pantoja is a 1.40 favourite, which is going to be minus 250 for an implied probability of 71%. If you take a look at the odds on Van, he's a 2.95 underdog, which is going to be plus 195 for an implied probability of 34%. So let's whiz through the fighter comparison, see what we've got. So Josh Van is 12 years younger than Pantoja, and we've got all kind of age stats that we use every week in these breakdown videos, and statistically a 12-year age gap does give Van a 70% chance of winning in this. The younger fighter wins around 70% chance when there's a 12-year age gap in a fight. However, stats are only useful if they're interpreted correctly, and this stat, or the age stats in general, reflect that you don't see old guys beat young guys very often. This is a young person's sport. However, at opposite ends of the scale, I think you start to see the stats become really extreme and meaningful, right? In terms of the older the fighter gets, the bigger the advantage the younger fighter is going to have. But at the same time, if we think of it like a scale, I think there is a phenomenon in the UFC as being too young as well. Too young and too inexperienced. So being very old is bad, being very young is bad as well. And Van at 23 years old, even though Pantoja is quite old for a flyweight now at 35, for me 23 is very, very young to be taking on someone like Pantoja in a title fight. So I feel this goes against Mr. Van. They're both the same height, about the same reach, about the same leg reach. And now when we get into the stats behind their performance, things start to get real interesting. So Josh Van lands an average of 9 strikes per minute, which is absolutely absurd. This is one of the highest volume strikers in the UFC. It's very, very difficult to find anyone that lands more strikes per round than Van. The guy is a buzzsaw. He fights at a high pace, and this will cause Mr. Pantoja problems. We'll be talking about this throughout the breakdown. You can see that he lands more than double the amount of strikes per minute that Pantoja does, which is kind of crazy because Pantoja also throws a good volume of strikes per minute. It's not like Pantoja is a passive low volume striker. 4.5 strikes per minute is pretty good, but Van completely smashes it and lands double the amount of strikes per minute. He's also slightly more accurate, slightly better defensively, although we'll get into the nuances behind that in a moment. And then obviously we know Pantoja, very high level MMA grappler. He has the advantages in terms of takedowns, lands an average of 3 takedowns per 15 minutes, on average 1 per round. We can see both guys pretty difficult to take down, and obviously Pantoja way more active with attacking submissions in a 15-minute period. We don't have the stats for Josh Van. We've got some issues with generating data for Van because a lot of places call him Josh Van, others call him Joshua Van. That's why you can see his fighter image is broken. and his strike distribution chart's broken, as well as his MMA record being a little bit broken compared to a very nice, comprehensive, complete record here for Mr. Pantoja, who has a name that is far more easy to understand and interpret. But this system is becoming more intelligent and evolving every week. So with every week that passes, this system will get better and better. And if you like this system, if you're watching on YouTube, you want to gain access to this research tool, you can find the link to it in the description below. Once you're on my website, just come to tools. There it is. It's the UFC research tool, which you can see here. It's very useful. You can gain access to it for like $19.99 a month. Absolute peanuts, and it will save you an absolute boatload of time, which is why I spent a lot of time and a hell of a lot of money building it. This shit was not cheap. This took a lot of time and a lot of money, but now it's saving me a lot of time, and hopefully in the future it's going to make me a lot of money. So let's get into the reasons why I think this is a very difficult fight for Josh Van on multiple fronts. So before I started researching this fight, I thought Josh Van was very capable of causing Pantoja big trouble in this matchup and potentially causing a huge upset and becoming one of the youngest UFC champions ever. Unfortunately, when I started to research the matchup, I became far less confident in Van's chances of causing an upset, and I'm going to show you a little bit of footage in this breakdown video for you to understand the reasons why. But my initial thoughts on this fight, and maybe if you're watching this, this will be your thoughts as well. And if it is, I would urge you to go and research this one, because I completely changed my mind after doing research. But my thought initially, and probably your thought, was Pantoja slows down in fights. Van's pretty difficult to take down based on the Cejudo and the Cody Durden fight. If Van can weather the early storm, drag Pantoja into the second half of the fight, perhaps he can kind of tire Pantoja out, and then that's when Josh Van's incredible pace, incredible volume, being one of the highest volume strikers in the UFC, can start to give him that edge, and he can really start to pour it on and cause Pantoja big problems. That could still happen. That is Van's path to victory, and it could still happen. I just feel a lot less confident in it happening than I did before I researched this one. So let's first of all get into how they match up when it comes to grappling. And again, apologies, because of there being some issues with Josh Van's name, we don't have a comprehensive set of data for Van like we do for pretty much every other fighter on this card, Pantoja included. So you're just going to have to take my word for it when I'm talking to you about how Van's past fights have gone. So Josh Van's takedown offense is generally really good. You can see it in the stats. He's defended 81% of takedowns, which is really, really good. Van is also difficult to hold down. So Van is one of these guys that knows how to work his way back up to his feet. And if he does get taken down, he will immediately start to work back up. Another thing that's great about Van is that he's got elite cardio, right? And you'd need it. In order to be one of the highest volume strikers in the UFC, you'd need to have a gas tank to enable you to throw such a high volume of strikes. But Van's got good grappling cardio too. We saw that in the Cejudo fight, where Cejudo spammed takedowns for 15 minutes and Van didn't slow, neutralize the threat of Cejudo's wrestling, and just continue to pour it on the feet. So Van won't get tired, and Van has a huge edge when it comes to cardio in this fight, and I really do think this fight could be decided by cardio, so that does give him a very, very big edge. But the problem with Van in this, or the problem for Van in this fight, is that we've only seen his takedown offense and defensive wrestling against Ray Cejudo and also Cody Durden. And while Cejudo and Durden are decent MMA grapplers, decent offensive wrestlers, particularly Durden, they're not in the same universe as Alexandre Pantoja. And while Alexandre Pantoja does have a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he was the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach at Nova União for a very, very long time. What I love about Pantoja is that he's not one of these pure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners that bolts on the odd takedown like a Werner Jandiroba or a Mackenzie Dern. He's legitimately developed ultra high level wrestling to go with his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu so that he's able to get guys to the ground, and he's got good chain wrestling, a very diverse range of ways to get you to the ground. And Pantoja is one of these guys who is very physically imposing. So he's kind of the opposite of Dvalishvili. He doesn't have the cardio to spam the volume of takedowns that Dvalishvili spams. But the difference with Pantoja is that when he does get a takedown, he makes it count. He obtains a dominant position with it. He racks up a lot of control time. And so Pantoja is kind of the complete opposite to Dvalishvili. He's the yin to Dvalishvili's yang, right? If you look at Pantoja's stats, you can see that in terms of, in fact, you know what? They are a little bit less impressive than I initially thought. I hadn't actually looked at the stats in this fight on a deep level when it came to grappling because, I mean, we all know Pantoja's got the edge on the ground, right? And when I'm watching footage of Pantoja, I kind of evaluate his wrestling. But in actual fact, his stats are pretty bad. He's only successfully completing about 50% of the takedowns he shoots as well. I thought it would be higher than that based on his past fights, but then in the second half of his fights, when he starts to get tired, his takedown entries are sloppy and shit, and then his opponent does have more success stuffing him. So I think if you looked at Pantoja's success rate on takedowns in the first half of the fight, it probably would be 70 to 80%. But then in the second half of the fight, it's like 30-40%, and then in the end it averages out at about 50. So I guess that kind of makes sense. But with Pantoja, he's the opposite of Dvalishvili because when he shoots takedowns, he commits everything that he's got to that takedown and has crushing physicality and generates a lot of drive on the entry and is really good at either, you know, taking you back in a scramble or chaining different takedown attempts together, which enables him to obtain a dominant position on the ground. His back takes are some of the best in the history of the UFC. Very, very slick back takes. And once Pantoja is on your back, good luck, because you're probably going to spend the rest of the round wearing him as a backpack. He goes straight to the body triangle, and his control from back control, it's brilliant. I mean, you can look at his record, look at how many wins by rear naked choke he's got. 1, 2, 3, 4. I know this one was obviously a long time ago, 4 years. Royval much better now than he was back then, but still, this guy's back takes are elite. They're as good as it gets, and we haven't really seen Van face someone that's as tricky and crafty as and experienced and as physically imposing as Pantoja on the ground. So even though Van's takedown offense and ability to work his way back up to his feet does look good based on past performances, I think early, because of how physically imposing Pantoja is in grappling positions, I think Van's really going to struggle to keep this one on the feet early. Van's going to probably be able to take him down and do pretty much whatever he wants to him. It's a bit of a shame that we don't have detailed stats. Maybe it has Cejudo been no, we don't have history on Cejudo. We probably have history on Cody Durden though. Do we have history on Durden? No. Okay. Never mind. Oh, actually, just bear with me a second. I'm going to go to the fighter database and see if either guy is in the database. So if we go, Cejudo is not in there. Just trying to find the stats. No, Durden's not in there. Because they haven't fought recently, they haven't entered into the database yet, which is a bit of a shame, but when they next fight, we'll obtain all their data. Anyway, I digress. Back into this one. So yeah, Van does give up takedowns. He was taken down against Cejudo and Durden, but neither Cejudo nor Durden was skilled enough or strong enough to keep him down. I think the difference with Pantoja is he will be. Now, if Van can survive into that 3rd, 4th, 5th round, we know Pantoja tends to slow down a lot, and that's when Van can really shine by putting a crazy pace on him and punishing him for tiring out. But Van's got to make it to the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round first, and that won't be fucking easy with how dangerous Pantoja is on the ground, but also on the feet, which now brings us nicely into talking about how these two match up when it comes to striking. So when I started to research this fight, I had the perception that Van would just be way too technical for Pantoja and that Pantoja would be in a lot of trouble when it comes to striking. We know Pantoja's got power on the feet, but we also know he's kind of sloppy. And, you know, in my head I had these visions of Van kind of walking guys down and slipping shots and rolling with the punches and putting them on the back foot, putting them under loads of pressure and just ripping them apart with these massive 10-15 strike combinations we know he likes to throw when guys are trapped up against the cage, right? Ripping the body, jabs, leg kicks, everything. Van's a fucking machine. He's an animal. He's brilliant on the feet. We know this. But when I started researching the matchup, I actually started to like Pantoja's chances of causing Van problems when it came to striking more than I thought I would. And that's mainly because Van is pretty bad defensively. Van is a guy that does tend to get dinged a lot. He does tend to get rocked, wobbled, and dropped a lot. And Pantoja has big power. Remember what we said. Pantoja is the yin to Dvalishvili's yang. Dvalishvili has no physicality to his grappling. Pantoja has a abundance of physicality to his grappling. Dvalishvili has no power in his hands. Pantoja has real power in his hands. He can damage you and hurt you on the feet. And we have seen Van rocked, wobbled, dropped, even knocked out in a lot of his fights over the last few years. Getting knocked out by Mr. Charles Johnson isn't a good thing, and Pantoja is certainly a more dangerous striker than him. So in this fight this weekend, I really fear for Van, because Van's biggest strength is also his biggest weakness. Darren Till famously said that when you put yourself in a position to knock your opponent out, you also put yourself in a position to be knocked out. And what he means by that is when you're coming forward on the front foot attacking, you're very, very vulnerable to counters. And this is the big issue with Van. Van's brand, Van's style, the reason why we all love Van and would love to see him win this weekend is because he's hyper, ultra aggressive, right? In order to land one of the highest volume numbers of strikes in the UFC ever, you've got to be very aggressive. You've got to come after your opponent. You've got to chase him down. You've got to stand right in front of him and force him to exchange. That's the only way you can land an average of 9 strikes per minute, which is absurd. A lot of fighters don't land 9 strikes a round. So Van puts himself in the firing line, and because of that, he does get dinged a lot. He does take a lot of damage. He does eat a lot of big shots. Van hasn't fought that many big power punches, but when he's fought guys that do have a little bit of power, like an Edgar Chairez, we do see him get dinged. We do see him get rocked. And Pantoja is a much more dangerous striker than anyone that Van has fought. So I worry for Van in this one. And what I really want to do is just show you a really quick clip of my worries for Van, so that you can kind of see the issue that I have with him. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up Josh Van versus Brandon Royval. And we're not going to watch the whole thing, because I don't want to make this breakdown super long. But I'm just going to play a couple minutes from the second round, so you can see the real issue that I've got with Josh Van in this fight. So we're going to go to the second half of the round. And obviously we know Van has got a predominantly boxing-based style of fighting. And this fight against Royval really shows that whilst Van's style is incredible and we all love it, it's so exciting to watch, it does show that as Van starts to face a step up in competition, he's probably going to struggle very bad unless he evolves a bit and starts to fight a little bit safer and more strategically, because this style works against lower level fighters. They're going to get overwhelmed by your technique and melt when you start to put the pressure on him. But against these higher level guys at the top of the division, they won't fade as much as those lower level guys like a Cody Durden. They won't panic, and they'll fire back. And when they fire back, you're in a lot of trouble. So Van has a very, very, very heavy boxing style of fighting. And what you'll notice, and I'm only going to play this 2.5 minutes here for you, what I want you to look out for, and what you'll notice is Van doesn't really take a backward step, and he's not very light on his feet. His footwork's not the best. His footwork is great on the front foot when he's using footwork to cut the cage off and pressure you. But in boxing range, his footwork isn't good. So he tends to stand right in front of you, quite square, and he gets hit a lot. He really gets hit a lot because he doesn't like to take a backward step. So we're going to play this 2.5 minutes. And if you go back and watch the entire fight, I'm not going to play the whole fight now. Don't want to make this breakdown video super long. But just look at Van in the exchanges. What you'll notice is he doesn't really take a backward step. He doesn't move his feet much. He just kind of stands in front of Royval and exchanges. Now, on one hand, you could say, well, maybe that's because Royval's not a power puncher. Van wanted to keep the pressure up. So Van, didn't really fear Royval's power, so he thought he'd just kind of stand in the pocket and trade with him. But from my perspective, that's potentially true, but it also kind of explains the reason why Van gets rocked so much, right? If he's not light on his feet, if he's not moving his head, if he's not backing up and trying to slip shots, like you see, just little exchanges like this, right? Stands right in front of Royval, flat-footed and square. In this exchange here, super vulnerable, chin up high and exposed. And even when Royval's chipping away at him with the jabs and the hooks that you see here, he's just not backing up. He's not taking a backward step. He's kind of walking under the jab. And Royval doesn't have the power to hurt him. He is a volume striker, but you think, man, against someone like Pantoja that can really hurt you, the reason why he's eating these clean, hard, stiff jabs, these impactful hooks, is because he refuses to take a backward step. And yes, that's amazing, because he, by standing in the pocket, he can average those 9 strikes landed per minute. But that's also the reason why he gets rocked, wobbled, and dropped a lot. He takes way too much damage. He gets hit too much. Defensively, he ain't good. Royval didn't have the power to make him pay. Pantoja does. Pantoja could legitimately knock Van out in this fight. So Van's biggest strength, his cardio, his output, his volume, his aggression, his pressure. That's also his biggest weakness, because it puts him in the firing line. I mean, look at this. Royval lands a clean left hand here. What's the left hand? Thing is coming now. Slow-mo, so you can appreciate the impactfulness of it. And more so just so you can appreciate how clean Van gets punched. And this is why he gets rocked so much. Watch in this next exchange. Watch the left hand of Royval. And because Royval doesn't have any power, Van just kind of eats it and walks through it. But against a guy like Pantoja, you could be looking up at the lights. Look at this left hand coming now. Boom. Right on the chin. Right on the chin. Crazy. Crazy, crazy, crazy. So we'll let this run for another 45 seconds. Hopefully you can see what I mean. Like I said, I don't want to make this breakdown super long. But he just doesn't take a backward step. He wants to exchange. He wants to stand in front of you. And I love Van. I would love to see him win this weekend. But I worry that Pantoja is going to knock him out, because you can't fight like this against the best guys in the world, or they will make you pay. And at 23 years old, I hate to say this, because I would love to see Van win. But at 23 years old, I do wonder if this is perhaps too much too soon. Have they rushed Van into the title picture? Have they rushed him into a title shot? I understand why. Pantoja's so damn good. He's beaten everyone. They need some fresh blood, some new names, to challenge him. And Van is very, very good. But for me, he's nowhere near as sharp on the feet. And Pantoja does have true, legit knockout power. So, for me, even though Pantoja's a pretty big favourite this weekend, I'm not interested in betting Van. Initially I was, then I researched it, totally off the Van train. I think Pantoja wins this relatively easily. Unfortunately, his odds reflect that. He's at an implied probability of 71%, so to get any value at all, you'd have to cap him at about 75%, which for me is impossible to do with a guy like Pantoja, because his cardio isn't great. But I do think he most likely wins this very, very comfortably, and will most likely retain his belt on Saturday night. He's also a tough fucker, right? He's very tough, very durable. So if we take a look at the over-under, I would actually be very surprised if this one went to a decision, just because I see three possible outcomes. Pantoja by submission early, Pantoja just knocking Van out in one of those exchanges, or I could also see Van kind of weathering the early storm, dragging Pantoja into the second half of the fight, and then stopping him late on as Pantoja becomes too tired to defend himself. So we can see pretty steep favourite odds on fight ends inside the distance. In terms of props, I'm very interested in the odds on Pantoja by knockout or TKO. Wow, okay, there's a prop for you. I do like props like this. You guys know my perspective on props. With props, I'm not necessarily looking for the most likely outcome. What I'm looking for is something with a good risk to reward ratio. And while Pantoja by knockout or TKO isn't the most likely outcome, the odds are very generous. He's a 9.0 to win by knockout or TKO, which is an implied probability of 11%. I think there's a higher probability of him winning by knockout or TKO based on how hard he hits, how bad defensively Van is on the feet, and how often we see how often we see Van rock guys or get rocked by guys. And Pantoja does like to throw down and sit down on his shots. He does hit very hard. So obviously, when you're placing bets in this odds range, they're not super likely to win, but you don't need to place bets in this odds range very often to earn a long-term. You don't need to win many bets in this odds range to earn a nice long-term profit. Sorry, my brains have been melted, struggling to get my words out. Now let's break down the fight between Henry Cejudo and Peyton Talbott. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see that Talbott is a pretty big favourite at average odds of about 1.37, which is going to be minus 271 for an implied probability of 73%. If we take a look at the odds on Cejudo, he's about a 3.12 underdog, which is going to be plus 212 for an implied probability of 32%. So let's bring up the fighter comparison. So Peyton Talbott, similar to Joshua Van, is 12 years younger than his opponent. But when we were breaking down the Van versus Pantoja fight, we were saying that even though we know the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 10-year age gap in a fight, stats are only useful if interpreted correctly. And I feel, Pantoja at 35 years old isn't crazy old yet. And at 23 years old, Jan's very young and inexperienced. So that big age gap kind of works against Van in that particular instance. This, on the other hand, is where the age stat becomes really meaningful. Because what those age stats kind of show is that this is a young man's game. The older you get, the faster you decline. And generally speaking, if you've got really old fighters facing younger fighters, the younger guy wins the vast majority of the time. This matchup is in the bantamweight division. Cejudo is very old for a bantamweight. I mean, essentially he's a blown-up flyweight, but he's almost 40 years old. And it's not very often that guys close to 40 beat guys that are 26 years old. So that gives a big statistical edge to Talbott in this fight. Does it go all the way towards justifying that 73% price tag, that 73% implied probability in the odds? I'm not so sure, but once we get to the end of this breakdown, I think we'll have a pretty strong opinion on this one. Not only does Talbott have the big age advantage over Cejudo, but he's also got a big size advantage. He's 5'10", which means he's 6 inches taller. He's got a 6-inch reach advantage as well, and a 3-inch leg reach advantage. So when you compound the leg reach, the reach, and the height together, it gives Talbott a huge size advantage. And at the weigh-ins earlier on today, we really saw just how big and just how meaningful that size difference is between these two. I'm just going to mute the video, and you can see Peyton Talbott absolutely towering over Henry Cejudo. He has a massive size advantage. So not only is Talbott a lot younger, which gives him an edge, but the height, the reach, the leg reach are going to be very difficult for Cejudo to overcome. And Cejudo's always been a bit undersized. Even in the flyweight division, he was a small flyweight. So if we then look at the performance stats, we can see that Talbott lands almost 60% more strikes per minute. He's a little bit more accurate. He's not quite as good defensively as Cejudo. Cejudo does have good footwork, good movement, good boxing. And then in terms of the grappling stats, we can see that Cejudo, naturally with that Olympic level background in wrestling, shoots more takedowns per round on average. And we can see both guys pretty difficult to take down, although we will get into that because there are some issues with Talbott's takedown defense we need to talk about. Neither guy really goes for submissions on the ground. On the ground, they both favour control. So that's how they match up in terms of the fighter comparison tool. And if we now take a look at how they match up when it comes to striking and grappling, we should start to paint a picture of how this one's likely to go. But before we do that, there is just one more pretty major X factor we've got to cover, and that is that Henry Cejudo has announced that this is his last ever fight and that he's going to be retiring after this one. So let's hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Here is Henry talking about his decision to retire from the sport.
Is this the last one? Are you coming back just to get that taste out of your mouth? Have you decided? No, this is it for me, guys. This is it for me. Unless Dana wants me to, unless there's a really big fight with some other Mexican, then I'd be willing to do it. But other than that, I think I've done everything at the highest level since I was 11 years old. From cutting weight at that damn time, and there's just a lot of satisfaction in my life. I'm ready to move on too, man. I have a couple kids that want to play with their dad 24/7.
So what are you hoping to get out of this on Saturday? Like, what's going to make this a satisfying experience?
Just giving it your all. Like, that's it. Giving it everything that I have. It's not even about anything else, but just giving what I have, what wasn't given to me my last fight. That's all. A fair shake, despite whatever the outcome could come. Payne is good. He's a humble dude, man. Like, he came out to pretty much be mentored by me for a few days coming out there. So that says a lot about him. I walked him into my house. This was ironic. This is right before I fought Merab, so he can even tell you that I was hurt that whole fight camp, because he came out. I think it was we're getting close. He was like, "Hey, what's wrong?" I was like, "Yeah, my groin's torn." He said.
So there was Cejudo talking about his decision to retire this weekend, which is a pretty big deal. If you guys have been watching my videos for years, you will know that I often talk about how rare it is the fighters win when they pre-announce their retirement. So when fighters announce they're going to retire, they almost always go on to lose. The only real time you get an exception is if they're kind of facing someone in a similar position to them. Sort of, if you have two fighters who are very old coming to the end of their career, someone's got to win, right? But generally speaking, when old guys fight young guys and the old guy announces their retirement beforehand, they almost always lose. They lose an absurdly high percentage of the time. I'm going to start tracking stuff like this in the new bet tracking software on our brand new website, so that in the future I'll be able to really quantify this for you and give you real useful stats behind trends like that I've observed anecdotally. Betting the sport for 15 years, making a profit every single year for 15 years. And so, yeah, man, we're going to be hopefully in a position to really dig into the detail on this sport on a very deep level in 2026 and have a lot more interesting stats that we can use to make betting decisions based on observations I've made over a very long period of time, thousands of hours of work, and over a decade of experience. So with Cejudo announcing his retirement this weekend, I'd be extremely surprised if he were to win this fight against Peyton Talbott. The size difference, the age gap, the retirement talk, even before you get into talking about how these two match up stylistically, Cejudo's got pretty much every X factor possible going against him. But we do have to talk about how they match up stylistically. And to some extent, this is a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Talbott the striker, Cejudo the grappler with that Olympic wrestling background. Although we know for the majority of Cejudo's career in the UFC, he'd spent more time striking than grappling. But if he tries to stand and strike against Peyton Talbott this weekend, he's going to get lit up bad and probably brutally knocked out. So he is going to need to grapple. And in the clip I played you of Cejudo announcing his retirement, he did talk about how he was injured going into the Dvalishvili fight, which is interesting because he was doing extremely well against Merab Dvalishvili. If we take a look at the stats on that fight, you can see that he defended a good amount of takedowns from Merab, landed a decent amount of strikes while the fight was standing. In the first half of the matchup, he actually dropped Dvalishvili, or at least rocked him in the first round, and was winning the fight up until the halfway point where he randomly gassed out of nowhere, which is very unusual because Cejudo built a career off having pretty damn good cardio. I mean, his fights against Demetrius Johnson, not many guys are able to keep up with the pace that Johnson would fight at, and Cejudo was one of the very rare guys who could do it. So with that being said, was Cejudo gassing out against Dvalishvili due to that injury? More than likely. It was very out of character from Cejudo to gas out after 6 or 7 minutes. But at the same time, we're seeing a lot of decline in Cejudo at the moment in terms of his movement, his reflexes, his explosiveness. So it's probably a bit of the injury. It's probably a bit of a decline as well. And his gas tank is probably not as good as he used to be. Talbott's gas tank, very good. He did slow a little bit against Rony Barcelos. But for the most part, he has a pretty good cardio. And at this stage in their careers, better cardio than Cejudo, in my opinion. So we know that Talbott is going to walk Cejudo down with that sniper style of striking. Look to take Cejudo out on the feet. He should do very well on the feet. And so this fight will be decided by whether or not Cejudo can get Talbott down, and more importantly, can keep Talbott down. That's critical to determining the outcome of this one. So Talbott's takedown offense is pretty good, to be honest with you. Now, you may be rushing to the comment section on YouTube or rushing over to the chat room to tell me otherwise. But if you go back and watch Talbott's last 2 fights against Barcelos and against Felipe Lima, he actually did a pretty good job of stuffing the majority of takedowns were thrown at him. You could see he stuffed 7 out of 15 takedowns against Barcelos. Don't have the takedown defended stat against Felipe Lima. We will get that soon. But he also stuffed the vast majority of takedowns that Lima shot at him as well. What you notice about Peyton Talbott in both of his fights against Lima and Barcelos is that his takedown offense is pretty good, which is backed up by the fact that he has 77% takedown defense, right? Very, very impressive. But there is a window of opportunity. Maybe I shouldn't say window of opportunity, but there is an opportunity still to cause Talbott huge problems with grappling if you can flatten him out and put him on his back. So generally what you tend to see with Talbott is he's very difficult to take down. He's very good at quickly scrambling back up to his feet if you don't establish a dominant position whilst taking him down. But if you do manage to flatten him out and get on top of him, he does still look quite weak off his back. Now, I will say that Felipe Lima grappled against Talbott quite a lot. And I will say, based on the Lima fight, I do think his takedown offense is improving at a rapid rate. So his takedown offense and ground game against Lima looked a hell of a lot better than he did against Barcelos. Yes, Barcelos is a better MMA grappler than Lima, but you could still see that Talbott against Lima wasn't making some of the same mistakes that he made to cost him against Barcelos. And there was only, 4 or 5 months between these 2 fights. So that would suggest that Talbott is improving his MMA grappling at a very rapid rate. And then if you look at the date here, June 28th, I mean, we're about 5-6 months on from them. So you could see if Talbott's improved exponentially between these 2 fights in terms of his MMA grappling, could have doubled in capability again in the last 5-6 months, right, at the rate at which he improved between these first 2 matchups. But what I do want to show you is just a little sequence from the Lima fight, or a few sequences from the Lima fight, so that you can see, even though Cejudo has pretty much every fucking disadvantage you could possibly want going into a fight in terms of physically, right? Retirement, size, age. Technically, in terms of how they match up stylistically, there are opportunities for Cejudo to win this. And rather than me just explaining it to you and talking to you about it, I'd rather show you with footage to back it up, as always. So what we'll do, we'll flick through this Felipe Lima fight. And what you've got to remember is Felipe Lima is a well-rounded fighter who mixes things up, and he does grapple, and he does strike, he does a bit of everything. But he's not on the level of Cejudo when it comes to MMA grappling. Even at 38 years old, Cejudo's got that low center of gravity, the decent takedown entries, and he's a much better MMA grappler than Lima, right? He may not have the strength, the physicality of Lima, because Lima's bigger. I do feel Cejudo's size is an issue. But at the very least, it's fair to say Cejudo's a more substantial challenge to face in terms of MMA grappling than Felipe Lima would be. So you can see here that takedown, not really worth talking about that one, to be honest with you, because the takedown entry come too far above Talbott's hips. This is one we want to pay attention to here. So you can see real nice takedown entry here. Lima shoots a very nice double leg entry, drives through on it. You can see Talbott caught flat-footed and off balance, drives through on it, gets it, right? So remember a few moments ago when I said Talbott's takedown offense has improved a lot, which it has, and there's also a window of there's also kind of a quirk to Talbott's MMA grappling, where he's very good at scrambling back up to his feet when you initially take him down, before you establish a dominant position. So before you flatten him out and put him on his back, he's very difficult to control. He's very good at scrambling back up to his feet. You kind of see that here. As soon as he gets taken down, he immediately pushes down on the head of Lima, gets to his knees, stands back up, scrambles over to the cage. We can start to use the cage as base defender takedowns. That's all good stuff. He did get taken down, but like I always say, I don't really care if your takedown defense is bad, so long as you can work your way back up. And then here we can see that Felipe drags him to the ground off a body lock. He just kind of rolls out of it and then shows urgency to scramble into top position and then wind up on top, right? So this is all good stuff from Talbott. You know, he's not accepting being in bad positions so much like he was against Barcelos. This is all good stuff. Good. We like it. But then a little bit later on, a minute later, you can see here, he gives up a very cheap takedown. Now, remember what we've been saying about Talbott. He's very difficult to control because in that small window where you hit the ground, he shows a lot of urgency to just explode back up to his feet or scramble out of there. We've seen it when he rolled out of that last takedown and when he got to his knees and scrambled over the cage in the first takedown. But here, Lima's able to establish a dominant position before he's able to scramble back up. So here you can see, you know, Talbott's going to try and turn to his right and get to his knees, but Lima does a really good job of using the overhook on the right side. Watch the overhook from Lima. So he's got this overhook here. He uses that overhook to generate enough leverage to kind of flatten Talbott out, and then Talbott's in guard. So there's about 1 minute and 20 seconds left to go in the round, and if we just tick through, he's been on the ground for 20 seconds, still in closed guard. Been on the ground for, you know, about 40 seconds at this point. He starts to get to his knees and work back up to his feet. But then he starts to hesitate in this position. And then he's back up after about a minute. So Talbott showed in that sequence that he was difficult to hold down. But it was against Felipe Lima. And I just wonder if Cejudo does have good enough cardio to go hard for 15 minutes. What this fight would look like if Cejudo just goes full NCAA and just spams takedowns. What would happen if Cejudo channeled his inner Merab Dvalishvili and just threw the kitchen sink at Talbott with takedowns for the whole fight? Would this look a lot like the Barcelos fight? It's possible. It really depends for me how much fire Cejudo has still got in his belly, how much he's still got left to give. Does he want to win? Is he showing up to fight? Is he going to bring everything? Or, you know, has he already kind of got one foot out the door mentally with the retirement and, you know, he's not going to be at his best this weekend. But stylistically, I do think if Cejudo came in and grappled his dick off, he probably would beat Talbott. But, you know, at the end of the day, we want to be betting with strong trends in our favour. We don't want to fight strong trends. And Talbott has 3 very strong trends in his favour. Trend number 1, 12 years younger. Trend number 2, huge size advantage. Trend number 3, Cejudo has announced his retirement. So definitely don't want to be taking Cejudo. The question is, can we bet Talbott at 1.37 minus 271 for an implied probability of 73%? I haven't made my mind up on this one. I'll tell you where I am with it, and I would love to get your thoughts in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube, or please slide on over to the chat room. It's a brand new chat room that we've just set up, and yeah, let me know your thoughts. A couple of people online right now, Mr. Scott and Tyler. Yeah, would love to get your thoughts on this. So my perspective on this one is 73% is a very steep price to pay on Peyton Talbott. Very steep price to pay. However, we know the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 10-year age gap in a fight. We know that, you know, when you have a 6-inch height advantage and a 6-inch reach advantage, or 6-inch reach advantage specifically, you win around 65% of the time. And when you compound the leg reach, the reach and the height together, that all starts to add up. And then when you throw into the mix the fact that Cejudo has announced his retirement and fighters barely ever win their retirement fight, And this 73% implied probability for Talbot all of a sudden doesn't start to sound that bad, because the way I would look at it is, if we know the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time anyway, and on top of that, he's a lot bigger, and on top of that, Cejudo's retiring, and on top of that, we know Talbot is difficult to take down and difficult to hold down, and on top of that, we know he's improving. All of a sudden, there's a lot of reasons to kind of like Talbot in this odds range. So I'm very, very tempted to bet Talbot this weekend. I probably will bet Talbot in some capacity. I haven't worked out how I'm going to do it, but I would imagine Talbot wins this. I'd be very, very surprised if Cejudo were to find a way to win. I mean, what are the best odds you can get if you shop around? Should we have a little look at it? Yeah, you can get like 1.40 on a lot of sites, actually. You can get 1.40 on a lot of sites. You know, I don't think that's that bad, to be fair. I don't think that's that bad. I think Talbot probably gets the job done. I don't usually bet big favourites in MMA. It's very rare I bet guys in this odds range. But for me, those are just such strong trends in Talbot's favour. And it's a decent stylistic matchup for him. And he's improving. So yeah, Talbot probably, I mean, with the size advantage, Talbot might even have the advantage on the ground. He might just be able to big brother Cejudo and overpower him. You know, 5'10" versus 5'4". That's like 2 weight classes apart. Size matters in MMA. We've got weight classes for a reason. So anyway, in terms of the over-under on this one, very likely the fight goes to a decision. I would agree with that. Pretty steep favourite odds. If we look at the record of both guys, we can see that Talbot, as he's now facing a step up in competition, is starting to go to a decision pretty frequently. And then if you look at Cejudo's record, a bit of a decisionator throughout his career. His last 3 have gone to a decision. I think this was like a grappling match or some shit, I don't even know. And so yeah, very likely this one goes to decision. Most likely outcome, I think, is Talbot by knockout or TKO. Talbot by decision. However, if Cejudo can't get the fight to the ground and run the clock down with some MMA grappling and some wet blanketing, I do think Talbot likely knocks him out. So Talbot by decision, slightly shorter odds than Talbot by knockout or TKO. Odds are terrible on both. I would give that a miss. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Jan Blachowicz versus Bogdan Guskov. So you can see both guys are in the even money odds range, with Blachowicz as a slight favourite at average odds of about 1.83, which is going to be minus 120 for an implied probability of 54.5%. If you take a look at the odds on Guskov, he's a 1.98 favourite, which is going to be minus 102 for an implied probability of 50.5%. So this fight is a little bit tricky to predict, because even though Bogdan Guskov has had 21 pro fights, there's still a lot that we don't know about him. If we take a look at his record, he has been a bit of a victim of his own success, because he just hasn't spent much time in the octagon. We can see his last fight ended in round 1, this one midway point of the fight, this one midway point of the fight, round 1, round 1, round 1, round 1, round 1, round 1, round 1. And so you've got to go all the way back to 2019, 6 years ago, for the last time Guskov went past the midway point in the fight, and he's only been to a decision once in his entire career, almost 10 years ago. So we know a lot about Jan Blachowicz. He's been around forever. We've seen him face every single style under the sun. But with Guskov, there are a lot of unanswered questions with him, because we just haven't seen him spend a whole lot of time in the octagon, and he's fought a bunch of low-level guys as well. But we'll do our best to break this one down, and hopefully you will find this useful. So Guskov is 10 years younger than Blachowicz, and we know that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 10-year age gap in a fight. They're both about the same size, and in terms of the stats, I don't think the stats are too meaningful on this one. I don't really want to spend a whole lot of time comparing them, just because Blachowicz's stats have been generated from competing against some of the best fighters in the world, and Guskov has fought really low-level opponents. So Guskov's stats will be misleading, because it will make him look like he matches up better than Blachowicz than he actually does, because landing 12.5% more strikes per minute against guys like Elikana, Span, Pauga is expected compared to guys like Blachowicz. who have fought some of the best fighters in the world, right? Alex Pereira, Magomed Ankalaev, Carlos Ulberg. Sorry as well that you don't have a nice, deep, comprehensive record for Blachowicz. The foreign character in Blachowicz's name has broken my system's ability to generate a proper record for him, whereas Bogdan has the full range of information on his record. So apologies for that, but we will fix that for Blachowicz's next fight, if there is a next fight, because at 42 years old, you'd expect him to be retiring any day now. Maybe he retires this weekend, who the hell knows. So in terms of how these two match up stylistically, based on past performances, I would give Guskov the advantage when it comes to striking, mainly due to age, and I would give Blachowicz the advantage when it comes to grappling, mainly because we've seen Guskov struggle a little bit when put in bad positions on the ground. But in terms of cardio, we don't know anything about Guskov's cardio just because he hasn't gone into that second half of fights. We know Blachowicz slows down a decent amount as fights go on, but we also know that he's a tough fucker that has no quit in him. And you know, he's won titles, right, in fights that lasted, you know, longer than Guskov's fucking been in the UFC in his entire cumulative number of fights added together. So Blachowicz is battle tested. We've seen him go the distance. We've seen him win decisions against some of the best fighters in the world, like Israel Adesanya. And so we know far more about Blachowicz's ability to perform over 3 rounds than we do Guskov. So cardio, complete unknown for Guskov. Blachowicz isn't great. At 42 years old, his cardio is not going to be getting any better, but for all we know, Guskov's could be even worse. In terms of how they match up stylistically, I said I gave the edge to Guskov when it came to striking, the edge to Blachowicz when it came to grappling. Again, I'm only basing that on the fact that Guskov has looked sharp, explosive and technical on the feet. At 42 years old, Blachowicz is a little bit slow, is a little bit clunky. He is Mr. Polish power though. He does hit like a truck. Power's the last thing to go. And he will be the most, maybe not the most dangerous guy Guskov's faced actually, because Span hits like a fucking truck. But in terms of all-round complete fighter, definitely the best guy Guskov has faced. And so, you know, on the feet, I would give Guskov the edge just because of youth and technique and speed and reflexes. But Blachowicz is a tough fucker, and he's been beating guys much younger than him for the last 5-6 years now, and he keeps surprising us and keeps breaking all the trends. So maybe Guskov gets exposed a little bit here. Maybe he gets fraud checked. Who the hell knows? I certainly don't, because his fights haven't lasted long enough for me to paint a good picture of him in my head as to his ceiling and what he's capable of. Many of his strengths and weaknesses are unknown. In terms of grappling, obviously Blachowicz is more of a striker, but we've seen him use grappling heavy game plans in his fight against Israel Adesanya to win the belt. And you know, Blachowicz will mix up his striking and grappling. He will shoot takedowns in most fights and does have a pretty heavy top game. Again, strong, physically imposing guy. He's got that power. Guskov's looked pretty bad in the very brief moments we've seen him on the ground. But again, you know, he's pretty young for the division. Could be making big improvements from fight to fight. And we haven't seen a whole lot of his grappling. And to be fair to Blachowicz, his offensive wrestling isn't the best. If he gets on top of you, does have a heavy top game, does have good grappling control, but he's not particularly good at getting fights there. So, you know, my lean on this one would be Guskov. I would just play the age trend. I think he's faster, sharper, more technical than Blachowicz. I don't ever want to be betting on 42-year-olds in a cage fight to the death. It's a young man's sport. But if I were to bet Guskov, it would be a total gamble because there are so many unanswered questions, and Blachowicz is still no picnic. At one point, he was the best light heavyweight in the world. So yeah, I'm going to pass on this one. I do think it's Guskov or pass. Betting on 42-year-olds generally isn't a profitable strategy in this sport, but wouldn't be at all surprised if Blachowicz wins. Don't really have a strong opinion on this one due to a lot of unknowns when it comes to Mr. Guskov. Now, in terms of the over-under, obviously Polish power Blachowicz, Guskov knockout artist. Very unlikely this one goes to a decision, but actually the odds are playable on fight ends inside the distance, which I'm surprised at. You know, for a guy like Guskov that has only been to a decision once in his entire career, yes, I know a lot of the time as guys face a step up in competition, you know, you see them go to a decision more often. We've seen that with both, well, Peyton Talbott as a great example. You you know, in his fight against Cejudo this weekend. But Blachowicz is very old, and at 42 years old, probably not that durable. Hits like a truck. Guskov hits like a truck. Very aggressive, very reckless. Fights like he's got a plane to catch. That's very interesting to me. I thought the odds would be a lot worse than that. I mean, you can get almost in the even money odds range on under 2.5 rounds, which is kind of crazy. That is kind of crazy. That is absolutely mental. Okay. Fair enough is fair enough. Fair enough. Alright, in terms of prop bets, I think most likely outcome for the props is going to be Guskov by knockout or TKO. Just betting against that 42-year-old chin, even though Blachowicz is tough as nails and hasn't given us any reason to doubt his chin yet. Right? Went the distance with dangerous strikers like Alex Pereira and Carlos Ulberg, but, you know, that can't last forever. It's a young man's sport. So if we take a look at the odds on Guskov by knockout or TKO, they're not great. They're very, very bad. So that one's an easy pass. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. And let us now move on to the next. Now let's break down the fight between Brandon Moreno and Tatsuro Taira. This fight positioned just before the co-main event between Pantoja and Van. I think the UFC sending a message that whoever wins this fight is going to be fighting for the belt next. And Taira versus Pantoja, that's a fight that I would love to see just because of how good they both are when it comes to grappling. Can Taira get past Moreno? He is the favourite in this one at average odds of about 1.79, which is going to be minus 126 for an implied probability of 56%. If we take a look at the odds on Moreno, he's a 2.02 underdog, which is going to be plus 102 for an implied probability of 49.5%. So Taira the slight favourite against the former champion. Let's take a look at the fighter comparison tool, see what it's saying. So Taira 6 years younger, but I don't think it's going to mean anything in this one because, well, Moreno is absolutely in his prime at 31 years old. They're both about the same size. In fact, on paper, exactly the same size. And then if we take a look at the stats, we can see Moreno lands 30% more strikes per minute, which is a pretty big edge, and if this one stays standing, it's going to be very difficult for Taira to outwork Moreno. But we can see that Taira is far more accurate. So, you know, 60% versus 44%. Striking accuracy of 44% is below average. It's not great. Taira really makes his shots count. Defensively, though, Moreno better, 14% better defensively, although I'm wondering if Taira's fight against Royval, where he got tired and lit up on the feet, is kind of skewing that defense stat a bit, because outside of that Royval fight, Taira's looked pretty good defensively on the feet. Then in terms of wrestling, we can see that you know,